So actually, it's a bit of a coincidence that these two separate topics have come up at the same time, because they're both in separate places. One's in one of the Irish megalithic groups on Facebook, and the other one is in Howard Crowhurst's videos that he's just starting to upload. He's starting to do Egypt and the pyramids, and he's actually just done a video recently about there's an area next to the pyramids, beside them, which is perfectly flat and level, like a long palisade, like a long area that he's sort of comparing it to Karnak in many ways. And he says that it actually would have taken more work to kind of flatten and level it out than it actually took to build the pyramids. Now, I've just got on to the top topic of this word that somebody mentioned in one of the groups called catacombs, and someone posed the question, you know, what does the word mean? And then I kind of like took an interest in this, because I actually didn't think of the Sphinx at first. Like, the Sphinx, it's the most obvious answer, really, but because at the time when they mentioned it, I was in the kind of mental kind of thought area of kind of Britain, so I didn't think of the Sphinx, because they was thinking about catacombs, you know, to do with the Irish and English sites in England. So I was thinking more about, you know, bones and burials. So, and when I researched the words, I've done a whole video on this recently, but I'm just adding this part to it. I'll just briefly kind of like backpedal onto basically, you know, combing and raking, and also, you know, cats. Well, we know that cats rake the floor for pleasure, and they've got retractable claws, but also, you know, they use it to prey as well. And then, you know, obviously, the word cattle, the first three letters of cattle is cat. But what they ended up getting cattle to do was attaching ploughs to them, and then they raked the land, you know, to plough it for seeds and crops. But also, you know, you end up, you know, mowing out quite a lot of the ancient sites. A lot of the ancient mounds and burials get mowed out and dug up, and the bones and any relics that are found, you know, and so forth. There's that connotation, but so now when I think of it, obviously the Sphinx really is meant to be like the giant kind of feline, human feline kind of combination form, and it's actually got the huge claws at the front of it that are actually under the earth. Now, if you imagine, obviously, if it did have retractable claws, the Sphinx, and then, you know, push them down under the ground, you wouldn't be able to see them in its current position. They would be invisible. And with that Sphinx size there, when you stand next to it, each of the claws would be well bigger than a person, you know. It would be almost like, you know, each of the claws would be a person buried under the ground, but vertical. Now, you know, and I think that's relevant to the word catacomb. Catacombs. Usually when you think of the word catacombs, you think of Indiana Jones and all these, you know, Indiana Jones films, and, you know, going underneath, you know, ancient churches and temples, possibly in Rome or Italy, in these, you know, windy streets and villages, or even in, you know, Istanbul or somewhere romantic like that, and under these crypts. Although I know that the Egyptian pyramids are obviously one of the things that come to mind when you think of tombs, and the Egyptians and so forth. But, you know, you don't necessarily think of, you know, farming when you think of the word catacombs. Because you don't usually think of cattle, you usually think of cats. Now, but another thing I'd like to add to it, I want to mention the ancient Colosseum as well. If I mention the ancient Colosseum, in Rome, the thing with the Colosseum is that it is a circle shape, right? So you'd think that might be somehow more related to, stone circles and the Celtic culture, or maybe at the time, earlier back, before the Celts actually attacked Rome, when they were getting on way before the Roman conquest of England, at least. But, the thing about the Colosseum is that, they had a lot of gladiator events, with chariots and things like that. If you've seen the Gladiator movie, I know that that's like a fictional movie, but that was a place where you had a lot of engagement with cats. They used wild cats that they captured in the gladiator fights. And they apparently they didn't feed them well, so they were more hungry and so forth. And it makes you think catacombs and the deceased. When you think of cats and the deceased and combing, almost like like they've got obviously the sand in the middle of the Colosseum, almost like if you get killed or defeated by these lions and tigers, they're almost like they're combing you to shreds with their claws, and it's almost kind of like the sand pit in the Colosseum with everyone spectating and watching, and the whole, all of Rome attending, to watch it. But how we ended up with that word really in use, really primarily, I think it's mainly used in the very, very ancient Christian references now, just catacombs, or maybe it is used in all religions, the ancient catacombs, but it's meant to be the dead buried under the ground. What's interesting in ancient Greece, not in Egypt, is that all the all the ancient pharaohs in the pyramids, not actually under the ground. It's all the workers, all the people who built the pyramids, but apparently they were quite well treated, who were actually under the ground. But if you add on that plough, if you add on the plough and the raking of the plough, combing the fields, and the cattle combing, that adds an interesting twist on it. Particularly when you have got this whole Karnak thing, because, there are a couple of symbolic interpretations for Karnak, which I don't think Howard Crowhurst has really gone into the symbolic part of it. He's purely really done the mathematical and the factual and the geographical area of discussion. The thing with Howard Crowhurst talks is, he does use the word implantation quite a lot, and he does emphasise on that word implantation. So, I know there is some symbology in, it's a big thing to learn about all the different plants and seeds and then go and collect them and then go, prepare areas to go plant them. But I don't necessarily think that Karnak in the north west of France is particularly, a place that is meant to be the origin of farming. They keep saying that it's the Middle East, that is meant to be the place where farming primarily originated, unless they're wrong about that, but the other thing with Karnak, when Howard's talking about all these, longitude and latitude lines, and that they had, ability to measure them and so forth, and calculate the size of the Earth, and that Stonehenge might be a representation of those dimensions. I think that, the thing is that, when the sun moves and as the sun rises, you can somehow see the speed of the movement of the sun, depending. So sometimes when the sun shines through clouds, and it forms those shafts, and the shafts move, as the sun moves across the earth, you can almost see like its line, if you know what I mean. Like there's a line it's almost like drawing a line. You've got light, you've got light and dark. I know that the sun rises gradually and it's more diffused when it comes up over the horizon. But the thing is that, with the there is an ability to measure speed with the sun, the speed of which it moves just by the observations of the light, particularly when the light is more focused and makes a more prominent line, And the thing what I was thinking of, Karnak, if you had a long lines set out, multiple lines set out, at certain distances, that might have been something to do with a calculation to help calculate, if you can figure out, how fast the sun is moving from one point to another point to another point to another point, like those rows in Karnak, and how long it takes. And then, obviously, when it takes that long and then it goes the whole way around and comes back again, you can just calculate the time with your watch and then multiply those distances of something like Karnak by, however, even hundreds or thousands or millions of times to work out how big the Earth is as well. That's another way of doing it, which I actually started thinking about after watching Howard Crower's film. The last video that I made, really, I suppose this kind of like goes on to that, because the thing with so the other video that I did before this is highly controversial, but I like to kind of like, touch on subjects which other people don't really want to get into or don't want to talk about for controversial reasons, for political controversial reasons. But I kind of think that they need raising. Otherwise, we may be in ignorance to underlying reasons or underlying motivations that are hidden or concealed. Kind of, I suppose, like the claws of the Sphinx. The claws of the Sphinx are concealed under the ground. They're hidden under the ground, aren't they? You can't see them unless you know that they're there. Almost like the issues inside the mind or inside, the mind, issues or problems that you can't see. The thing with the cats and the combing is that there's a certain, the carnivores are evolved to have a certain pleasure out of the feasting or out of the eating of meat and the killing, I don't know if you've seen that Hannibal Lecter film, but sometimes if you eat kind of like a rare cooked steak or a rare cooked salmon, it can kind of trigger certain chemicals in your brain that give a small amount of pleasure. I know that from, student parties and so forth, people who have, used to do MDMA, ecstasy tablets, it triggers a certain mechanism in the human where you actually can rake the carpet and get immense amounts of pleasure from raking the carpet, just raking it up and down with your fingernails. That makes you wonder, if women have got this women seem to be more into long fingernails than men, and they're slightly more emotional creatures where men are more intellectual, women are more emotional. Women, there's a more stronger in the female, there's more certain pleasure in the raking, of their nails. So when it comes to farming, and this ploughing, this combing with the cows, with the ploughs, or even though they're doing it for, farming or whatever, there's still this kind of pleasure, I suppose, in, some people say there's no pleasure in labour, there's no pleasure in work, depending on what your job is. But there's definitely this kind of idea that, if you're raking the fields, ploughing the fields, that you're digging up some of these skeletons and these bodies and these deceased, and there might be treasures there. There might be treasures to be found, ancient coins or ancient talks or, tools or whatever it is. But as well as that, if you are conquering somewhere and taking them over, I got onto the subject of, maybe there is some sort of pleasure in the erasure, the erasure of the defeated foe or the enemy, because that's the thing with the Roman Empire. They did have an objective to remove the Druids, and they didn't write anything down. And if you wanted to make a point out of it, particularly after 140 BC, apparently Rome was sacked by the Celts. If you wanted, if you were a people who did like to seek some sort of revenge or something, the prehistoric people were well known for placing those monuments of permanence and making a giant map out of the landscape and leaving their legacy there, leaving their knowledge that is permanently placed. So you can't get any village idiots turning up and walking away with the stones. That they're permanent, that they're there fixed. They made them so they're permanent, like like the motions of the sun and the moon are permanent, and certain forces are permanent, gravity and so forth. They really went to extraordinary lengths to map out these places that Howard Crowhurst talks about and make the maps a reality and have a permanent longevity to them. And then I got onto the subject of Woodhenge and the fact that, it was spotted by aerial photography at Woodhenge, and, it's lucky that they found it, the evidence of those massive, huge, thick tree trunks that are all actually thicker than apparently than the temporary markers they've got in now. The original trunks were a lot wider than that, and someone suggested there was a large tower. I questioned whether or not, I think this was found in the 1920s. So, I'm wondering if, when Tolkien was at university in Oxford and this was discovered, during his lifetime when he was writing The Lord of the Rings, I'm wondering if they already entertained that idea within the Oxford circles of academics that, Woodhenge might have been an immense tower with a beacon on it, because this is what Robert Langdon is talking about. He suggests that Silbury Hill had a fire beacon on it, but I don't think that necessarily it might have been a fire beacon. I was thinking that maybe it was a disc, a highly polished disc, at least when you get into the, Bronze Age and Iron Age, at least one of the ages of the metals anyway, at the least, after the Stone Age, when you get into the Metal Ages, if it was some highly polished disc, because if they worship the sun and the moon, then the disc shape is going to be something which they value a lot. And if you had a big wooden tower, with a disc on it, one thing you could do, is flash signals, or at least certain points of the day and in certain directions. If they're aligned right, you can use it to flash signals over quite a long distance, which can probably transmit messages a lot quicker than a bell. Well, if it's a church bell, it wouldn't travel as far distance-wise. If it's a church bell, you probably get more distance out of it with light than sound, providing you've got the line of sight. I mean, you see this in many cowboy films, when they get a glass and they're on the canyon and they do signals flashing the light, but you just watch it as a kid and you don't think that this is something important and primary. I mean, we know for certain they tell us about the fire beacons for the Spanish Armada that they had all the way up the country to send signal messages. One of them was here on our ancient hill fort, and one at Breedon on the Hill, Andrew Bridgen's hill fort. He's the MP for the area of North Leicestershire. Breedon on the Hill was one of them, supposedly. So they're acknowledging this beacon system, but they're saying it was just a fire beacon that was rarely lit and only used if the Spanish Armada would come over. But now, starting to put all this together, I'm starting to think that they're either trying to keep this hush-hush or playing us for fools. And the thing with the ancient Celtic people is that, only a certain amount of thing was in stone and a lot of it was in wood, which doesn't survive. So Woodhenge, if it was a big tower, I think Tolkien's explored that in his films, with the whole big Wizard's Tower themes. And also, with the Sauron Tower, with the eye on it, with the eye on the top, it's kind of like clicks that it might have been a disc to communicate rather than, a looking glass or a lens or something necessarily magical like in that film. But if they had a whole network of those with highly polished discs, they could flash between each other. It makes you laugh at the start of the movie when they've got the big gong, in the old movies, in the black and white movies and so forth, when they have the guy with the gong, but they're trying to associate it with hitting it with a hammer and making it a gong sound out of it, like when you ring the bell in a church. There's definitely something in the clog teach, in the Irish clog teach, even though they are meant to have bells in them. There's definitely something in those clog teach that maybe they knew something or had stories or, after the Roman army left from, 400 till, 800 is when they popped up. That 300 or 400 years of time before the conquest, there definitely is this kind of, did something survive of, pre-Roman conquest over those 400 years, and did they, build some memory into those clog teach or to try and remember? Not many of them survive now. So, there's quite a lot of things to throw into this, but I'm just wanting to kind of like just throw a lot of things in to get people to think about it. If Howard Crowhurst is saying that, these people were a lot more intelligent than everyone's making out, they got written off by, the Greeks and the Romans, fleeced them of all the merit of their work and study, and, they got accredited for it all with the writing it down on paper. Also, if there was any, Alexandria Library got burned down with a lot of scrolls as well, and a lot of information went missing as well, then, it's sort of, and I don't think that Britain needed or depended on farming at all. I really don't think it did, because of those diets found at Anglesey in the chambers, kind of like the eels and the frogs and snails, and, the Cambridge University study of the vegetarian diet of the kings, Anglo-Saxon kings. Although, vegetarian thing, you don't have to plant them, you can have, allotments or herb gardens and things like that. It doesn't have to be fields and fields and fields and fields of corn or one thing, like, poppies or whatever it is that you want to have in there. They're just examples of whatever you could have. Even that word mandrake's popping up to mind now, because even the word mandrake has got the word rake in it. Mandrake, manrake, mandrake. If it's meant to be like, there's some drawings of like a man or a human-like figure that you pull out of the ground, and when you pull it out of the ground, it screams. Manrake, mandrake. That's when you kind of think of like, if each of those claws on the Sphinx is like a body, under the floor, kind of, and like the Sphinx pulls its claws out of the ground and there's a scream, it kind of makes you think of that. But that's meant to be one of the magical plants. But the other thing on the Sphinx is that, they're actually saying that the Sphinx actually, the shape of it wasn't a full disc, but it is aligned with the sun. It was only this kind of shape of what those headdresses were. I don't think I've actually, I've seen the video from what it was meant to be when it was, fully complete. I don't think it was the entire full disc. For sure, that's definitely where this Halo idea comes from. But, when you're getting onto the Christian religion, the Roman Empire isn't the Egyptian Empire. I know there was some kind of contact, and under the Roman rule and empire, Egypt ended up coming under the Roman Empire at one point. But the Roman Empire and Rome is distinct from the Egyptians. So, but where do the Christians get the idea catacombs from, and the word catacombs? I don't think it's necessarily, from the Christian religion. Definitely is more of a general term associated with, the buried dead. But also there's some connotation and ideas in there to do with, the cats and this carnivorous kind of like prey. Which then again, like I said in the other video, let us pray. The word pray ironically means to say your prayers in a church, which is meant to be a holy thing, but also it can mean to prey on enemy. When you go hunt a stag or hunt a deer, you're preying, and that's what these big cats do. They prey on things. But then again, you're meant to have humans who are cultural, that are civilized, that are meant to be, religious, and in forgiveness, and 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, and all this, and praying in those terms is not meant to be killing. Although that didn't stop them from they weren't all vegetarian, the monks, that's for sure. But so there's definitely something significant with this Karnak thing and that area of land laid out perfectly smooth and flat next to the pyramids. But Howard's figuring it in as part of the alignments and the ancient measurements, So, my questions, I guess, are, is the origin of farming truly from the Far East, the Middle East, or is it kind of like, could it possibly be from Karnak, or, did it, eventually, some people in or around Karnak decided to make a big monument to it, but combined with the whole knowledge. Everyone in the Irish groups is always pushing this farming idea, the ancient sites and temples and tombs are all to do with farming. But, there are some quite large sites, in the south of Spain, ancient chambers and temples, and even there are a few in the north of Africa, not far from, the Gibraltar kind of corner of Africa. So, one of my questions for the Irish groups is that, are the Irish sites and the sites in Britain more kind of like would you say that those sites are like the more shabby, the more less well made, the more outreach areas of that ancient culture, or did it start with those areas and they started out more basic and simple, and they just didn't bother rebuilding them or improving them, and then when they actually decided to make them more better and improve them, the newer areas are the ones that made bigger and better monuments, like through Spain and so forth, and then possibly even with the pyramids, so because that's the shape of the Sphinx and that recess, between those claws of the Sphinx, that recess, it's very, very similar shaped to a lot of the long barrows and a lot of the court-shaped tomb long barrows in Ireland and Bellasnap and so forth. If there is a connection between those shapes, is the Sphinx the later, the more advanced and fruition of that, which came from the more simpler early ones, or are Irish ones, the far out, the cobbled together something further out, in the extreme, the extreme far reaches of that ancient religion. It would suggest probably not necessarily so if there are things like Stonehenge and Karnak, which aren't basic and simple and are a lot older, particularly in the earlier forms. Or is there always this constant rebuilding, like Stonehenge has been reworked and and everything. The thing with our country here in England is that a lot of things are made out of wood. And if they liked wood, and if wood was symbolic because it was a living material and it grew, it was something that grew and was living and it had, positive energies, why would they want to or need to build anything out of stone? Only certain things, made out of stone. But when it comes, and the last point, in warfare and in kind of, all that comes with warfare. I mean, even I've complained about the Germans using, the Auschwitz, the gas chambers. Some of them were made to look like ancient chambers, burial chambers. In some of the ancient Irish sites, some of them were made to look like that. The design of them, the shape of them. Surely, and Germany didn't get conquered by the Romans, but we did, and a lot of our ancient sites got destroyed. So there's got to be some intimidation going on in there, some provocation, and possibly some insult in the shape and form of those chambers. Sending the Jews in there to think they're going for a shower and dying, when there's a high probability that a lot of these temples, in Britain were used for use of the sacrament and to commune with God. Or the deity, which is definitely not, been sent to die. It's been going to, experience something and then re-emerge and come back. So, all these hidden motivations and hidden agendas, kind of like the hidden claws under the Sphinx, things that people don't want to talk about or the government doesn't want to discuss. Why do we all adopt the cross on the flag, and all this, is it from the poppies and, all the rest of it? For one thing, they definitely for sure they eradicated the sacrament and the religion from the Celts, that's for sure. And they weren't in a rush to stop the use of opium until the 1800s, and in fact we pushed it on the Chinese, and in fact we cannoned them to buy it. We threatened them with cannon. We bombarded them with cannons in order to get them to buy opium. So there are issues with that as well. So but when you've got an entire legacy of an entire prehistoric peoples who have got all these ancient massive stones that are made to not be moved, that are made to be permanent, unless it takes an entire village or an entire army to move them or pull them out. It's something to be proud of. So when you go and take over and conquer the culture and become a new dominating force, and even, your own, mathematicians, at least your own, the Greeks and Romans are meant to have, been quite close, tightly knit. They're, Pythagoras and so forth are taking the precedence for the, all the credit for all the mathematics and so forth. It does question if you can have a order of people who have gone to the extensive efforts to place all these ancient sites in these measurement places that Howard's talking about, to make these calculations and also to help guide them in travel. You're leaving a legacy there, and particularly a culture that never wrote anything down supposedly on paper, So, if you really were serious about, taking out their religious order, which they were, and, removing it, which was one thing for certain, the religion was removed, and you come in with, an army and are making roads everywhere and so forth, it would be, you are tasting, you're tasting the victory, basically, what Caesar and the other Roman people were doing. But if you wanted to compare with this might of Rome and this, prestige of power, this exhibition of power, how can you, show you're as powerful as an ancient religion or culture that you kind of wanted to erase? You definitely want to retain it. It is, erase as much as possible. It would be convenient for intelligent people who were, setting the trends and orders to unsuspecting or naive people, basically, to come and, get everyone hooked on farming, get everyone, addicted to crops and farming, and slap yourself happy. You rake yourself happy, almost like paint the town red. Rake the lands, comb the lands clean. Apparently a lot of this country was forest, and there were a lot of bears and wolves. They've all gone extinct. You're chopping down. When you fly over England in a plane now, it's not all forest, is it? It's all fields, and you can see all the square patchwork of fields. It's all been combed. There were a lot of it, and we wouldn't know of the existence of Woodhenge for a start if that had been combed much more, really, or deeper. You wouldn't know that it existed. I mean, luckily we've got these amazing scans of Maiden Castle, and you can place exactly where every single round hut was. You can see where all the actual huts, the actual houses, the actual roundhouses were on Maiden Castle through the scans. That's amazing. I mean, if that had have been catacombed to obliteration, you wouldn't even be able to get those scans. Now, this is where I really fall out with people like this Professor Alice Roberts, who I really can't stand her. She really is like the arch enemy of archaeology, but professes to be the champion and saviour of it, with their dig for Britain, and this kind of brainwashing and this delusion that academics have been put under the spell of their order, their Scientological order of Scientology, where they all have the motto, archaeology is destructive in nature, we can't help it. But yet, when they're clawing the floor and digging up gold, they're almost like, cats clawing at the meat, like Parker Pearson, tearing off the shreds of meat with the fines and, lavishing on the, biting the gold coins. It's almost like they're getting the teeth into the gold in the rapture of finding all these ancient artifacts for their own self-satisfaction, when a lot of it's destroying actual evidence of things, disrupting the earth and the ground. Could destroy it all, or a hell of a lot of it. I mean, if those Woodhenges if it was an immense tower with, large discs on to signal, and if there were more of them, we might never find where they were, if they've all been raked out. They could have been on the coast. They could have had a boat or several boats, kind of anchored to the channel. I mean, who knows, they didn't have anchors back then. Surely, if you can make, once you get into the metal age, you can make, anchors, although we don't know anyone who's found any ancient anchors yet. But, there's nothing to say that they couldn't have had boats, in place somehow. You only need a massive, huge anchor. And in fact, you could tie it to the bottom, if you had a good deep sea diver like these oyster divers, that they have in the Pacific, you know, you could theoretically, you wouldn't even need a massive metal anchor. You could just, you know, tie it to something which itself was, you know, on the bottom, like, you know, oh no, a stone. Why am I even? I don't even know why I'm thinking of metal, because you can just have rocks and stones with rope tied around it, you know, and chuck them down. And then you really could get into communicating over the British Channel quite quickly. And the symbolic thing about that is this. The symbolic thing is that if they worship the sun and the moon and these discs in the sky, and if they you know, if they had these not all of them had to be on towers. You know, you only need to be on a tower if you don't have the line of sight. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be on a massive tower, does it? It only needs to be on a massive tower if you need the altitude. You know, obviously, if it's in the Welsh mountains or something like that, it could just be there at a little campsite or whatever. You don't need the tower. You know, and I know that system would only operate at certain times of the day and only on clear days and only at certain angles and so forth. But obviously, once you learned how to do it and you knew all the angles, that's obviously you know all the angles for working out the distances over massive amounts of distance and measurements and all that. So, you know, flashing a mirror is at the right angle is a piece of cake, you know. But the power of the communication, you see, the word discus is to discuss, to talk. So when I discuss things with you, I talk with you. We communicate, we discuss, we knock subjects backwards and forwards. Now, you see, you have this in the Olympics. You know, the Greeks and Romans have that as an event in the Olympics. The discus, they hold the disc and they throw it backwards and forwards. You know, and you know, you can just throw it to see how far you can get it, or you can, you know, pass it backwards and forwards between people. But the discus, it's almost like, you know, passing the baton in the relay, because in the relay, you know, you have the baton and you pass the baton. It's almost like, you know, the messengers of the gods, you know, running with the message. But the word discuss is to talk and communicate. I mean, also, I suppose you've got the whole thing with the halos, you know, and Jesus in the, you know, the ancient Roman temples with the, you know, hands together, and, you know, they're all, you know, with, you know, the, you know, whatever, with the halo. You've got the whole idea of the halo communicating, the disc of the halo and the Sphinx. But then you've also got the practical discus, to discuss, to have a conversation. Well, if you had a massive disc and if you were using, you know, flashing light, Morse code symbols, then surely you would be having a discussion with discs, using discs to discuss, and instead of throwing the disc backwards and forwards, you're flashing the light backwards and forwards, you know. And this is way before even needing to invent, you know, lenses and magnifying glasses or anything like that. This is just very early Iron Age, you know, Bronze Age, Iron Age, you know, getting into that, you know. So I'm starting to think whether or not this... Well, actually, hold on a second. You see, one of the people on the Irish megalithic group has shown us this, which is different effects you can get from the sun and moon and eclipses at different phases. And those are very much like the symbol for the talk, you know, for the talks. That is very prominent as well. Hold on a second. There's this one as well. You see, you know, really they're all well known for having the bell at the top of the tower. You know, the Irish are known for having a bell at the top of the tower, or the church has the bell for its local parish. And then we've got the whole, you know, in movies, they usually have a bird carrying the message. In a movie, they usually have these, like, pigeons, you know, they have a bird and they tie a message to the bird's foot. and the bird carries the message, and otherwise no one would know about it. It's very secretive. Trained bird. You would think that if you had a bird that could fly and come back to a place quite quickly, you wouldn't need any other long distance message carrier. But the bird isn't necessarily that useful when you're wanting to make all these specific triangulation points and measurements and build ancient sites and things like that, because in fact Howard Crowhurst said this is amazing, how did they do it? How you can make precise alignments over massive distances and line them up is have points of light. And that is ironic and an insult, because, on the number 10 Downing Street website, on the Prime Minister's website, still now, they've got Points of Light Awards. Points of Light Awards. And ironically, it makes you think of the police who are, pulled up with their speed, beep, 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 speed guns, and the police are getting awards for fining people, prosecuting people from, pulling the trigger and sending laser beams at people, catching them speeding, but it's almost like it's like we're in the inner temple now. It's almost like, now we're in the inner temple. Infinite knowledge only reserved for the inner temple. Not even Mike Parker Pearson, not even Howard Crowhurst, not even Robert Langdon, only apparently, Tolkien, So, are they having us for fools? And Howard Crowhurst seems to think they are, because it suggests that the entire Greek, the entire teachings of school, the entire education system of England lays the claim that the ancient Greeks are the penultimate mathematicians and are credited for all the mathematics genius in history, and all the mathematics is named after them. Yet, according to Howard Crowhurst, it seems that is not necessarily the case when Stonehenge uses all these mathematical principles and predates it by thousands of years. And we definitely have bronze and iron. We're not talking, it doesn't have to be Stone Age. Bronze Age and Iron Age is still, going back a significant, time. But, what Howard is saying is that, they didn't necessarily have polished metal discs or anything that complicated or technical in the Stone Age, not in the Stone Age. So maybe it was purely by, the stars and the sun. Maybe it was purely by, the only disc that we had, which was the sun itself and the moon, and the fact of, just geography and just travel, and knowing the landscape and studying it. But for sure, still, Bronze Age and Iron Age are still way before, this resetting of the calendar and the birth of Christ and, the whole religious mystery cut-off point, and even the fact that we haven't really got anything officially recorded about any religions before then, really, and not written down, and the fact that, the ancient Greeks... well, we do have ancient Greek writings about religion. I think the disc is important. Well, it's gonna. Well, the talk is the key, really, because if you've got at the time they've got the talks, they've got metal. So, I guess if that theory is plausible, that it was something that was in use, then surely it's got to coincide with the whole culture that has the talks, that uses the talks. So here's just a picture I threw together with the talk. And I placed the talk in the middle of the recumbent stone circle. I guess you could put it like in Stonehenge if you wanted and put it facing the heel stone where the sun rises. But it just demonstrates that as an item, as a thing that apparently was worn either by, the leader of the tribe. Obviously, there's so many clans around, the Celtic, all the different Celtic clan leaders had talks, and they all had different ones depending on how skilled their metal workers and craftsmen were, or how much, how wealthy they were. All the talks were unique and different to each individual. But what I think it shows that the talk symbolises the knowledge of the clans, the knowledge of the people, and all the. It basically is a symbol of knowledge, and I think that it represents the observations, the knowledge and the observations of the clans. It represents all the metalworking skills. It represents all the knowledge of metals. It represents all the knowledge of the motions of the sun and the moon and the weather and, all the alignments and so forth. And possibly even the motions of the people, the members of the clans, the behaviours of the people, all of the observations, all the study, the emotions of the animals, the cycles of the animals, of the, calves and the plants, the motions of the seasons of the plants, which, you don't really need any of the ancient sites to know the knowledge of the seasons of the plants, because the plants inform you of when it's time to do this or that. By the physical changes in the plants. The seeds just fall off themselves. You don't need any sun to move into motion to tell you when it's time to plant seeds, because the plant kind of does it itself. So I think that watching the moon go over the top of the recumbent stone circle, and it almost, if you hold one of the sides of the talk and move it as like the moon is moving, it eventually comes in line with the other side of the talk. They both come aligned, and then obviously you can look through them, like you could put something through it to fasten them. And this is where you get this, because this is when you've got two discs, like you've got the motion of the sun and the motion of the moon, or at least the closest disc to us, actually come together. So it's kind of, in a way, it's like, getting both sides of the talk and bringing them together and looking through the middle of them. This is when you get the sun and the moon together, but obviously it's actually blocking your view of the sun. The moon's blocking the full view of the sun. This is what someone in one of the groups raised up on the subject. I think Howard Crowhurst's meant to be doing another live programme today on the pyramids and the alignments, which I'm going to watch. So, what was my point to this video? So I guess my point. So I guess my point to the video is that I don't from modern scientists now. These highly prolific modern scientists who are they're giving us an evaluation of now. What's going on? What's happening now? What is happening now in 2023? And it turns out that the truth, or the fact of what is happening is that we're all becoming susceptible to becoming ill, getting diabetes or cancers or worse, primarily because of really bad and poor diets, breads, because of basically breads, farming, and then they've even modified the breads even further, even more, and it's been even harming us metabolism even more, tougher and tougher and tougher breads. And, we're not eating, when we eat veg, we're eating all these potatoes, all these starchy vegetables that a lot of them came from overseas and abroad, like, potatoes and things like that. All these, Swedes and pumpkins and things like that. We're not sticking to like a mixed leaf diet, which we need the potassium and the vitamins. You don't actually even need to eat fruit. Fruit's just a sweet bonus if you're eating a lot of mixed leaves. Nettles apparently are meant to be really, really good for you. Calcium for your bones and potassium, and even help with testosterone. You can even reduce conversion to DHT, which makes people go bald. And we've got a lot of increase in estrogens at the moment, a problem with increasing estrogens and sexuality. We know that, as gut bacteria and gut flora is not as flourishing as much as it should be doing because we're not eating as much diverse plant material and so forth. Really, we don't really need to kill massive amounts of cattle and cows. Really, people, it's not on people's current modern fashion palette, but things like snails, which the French still eat. Obviously, it isn't. They pretend that frogs' legs and snails is French. I highly doubt it. It actually would have been all of the Celtic regions that ate them. And eels apparently are very, very tasty. They're very, very nice, the eels. And that would be like salmon, getting a lot of really good fish oils and healthy omegas and things like that. They used to make soups out of those. We're not short of snails. We're not short of snails, and you're not slaughtering a baby lamb. You haven't got so much of a guilty conscience eating snails as slaughtering baby lambs, or if you have observations of the clan. If you have observations of the knowledge of the clans that can make all these massive calculations and like Stonehenge and alignments and so forth, you're not retarded enough to, be ploughing fields and eating only corn, because you would know, you just understand from observations, of what is the correct amount to eat and not too much, and also what is a good mixture and variety of foods. So it seems to me that the more and more stupidity or misguidance you get, the worse it's become. And now, when we've got all this knowledge, the problem is we've got scientists, we've got labs, we've got organisations, we've got committees, we've got responsible people, prime ministers, secretaries of state, all these people, Dr. Fauci, but still they have this money, profits. All the pharmaceutical companies are doing it for money, for profit. Knocking us up with these, not only paracetamols, but, other, tablets, which, cause devastating effects inside the body. Some people have had these photographs of when they've been taking headache tablets, not paracetamols, the other ones. And it's just caused loads of, coagulation of, powder around their internal organs and so forth. There are two theories, and one theory is that it's stupidity and clouded vision, and another theory is that there is an intent behind it. There is an intention, there is a genocidal intention from some forces, powers that know more than us. And this is the whole, gets us back onto the Roman army. They wiped out and eradicated the religious use of the sacrament because they didn't want the people engaging with it. but they welcomed in, the whole, let's make bread and be happy with the poppy culture. And now we've got that on, every flag in Europe, every other flag in Europe's got it on it, as well as the main religion when we reset the calendar. But yet that gets, apparently we can't partake in that religious sacrament because that was banned in the late 1800s because everyone was going to smack dens in London. So, this is the thing. But, apparently the CIA and FBI, have been, business is booming with their research on these, things, DMT and so forth, according to Alex Jones. So, this is the thing. Is someone combing us? Is BlackRock Vanguard, Charles, Klaus Schwab, Klaus Schwab, the claws of Klaus, Klaus's claws. Is Klaus Schwab clawing us, raking us, are they raking us for us cash, raking us pockets for the money, which they've raked up in their giant, cash vaults, in Rishi Sunak's giant cash vaults, they're raking it in, is that catacombs, well, we're all ending up, poor, without any political, without any political power. This is the thing, are we being catacombed? Are we being, left for bones, like Cromwell? I mean, the evidence for this, one of the main pieces of evidence is for this catacomb theory that someone gets a kick, someone gets a pleasure out of this catacombing, this giant cat-like behaviour of toying with its prey, is not only the fact that, they've got the lion on the emblem of the royalty, which, what the hell has a lion got to do with Great Britain, seeing though that it's from Africa? Why is it one of the major beasts on our government with a unicorn that doesn't even exist, when supposedly it should be, bears and deer, right? So we've got this conquering, invading force that ends up negotiating the major part of our flag and every other flag in Europe through the Christian religion. And then they stick the lion from the centre of the Colosseum. If he's not content, raking the, dead bodies to the glee and joy of the participants watching in the Colosseum, after we get all this bad rap for apparent sacrifices in public, right, where they're reeling in the, Colosseum raking of the cats, like never mind watching, Freddy Krueger or Stephen King movies or whatever it is, right? Then we get that banged on the courts. When you go to court, when you have to go to court and pay a fine and they're raking the fines in, there's a lion on there raking it in, raking the money in from fines, when everyone's terrified. Everyone's going to court terrified of these, prowess of these great lions raking it in with their claws. But, we've got the actual king, the actual monarch in the restoration of the crown, actually goes and orders Oliver Cromwell's body, to be dug up and pulled around by cats. Now, I agree it wasn't... He didn't have it pulled around by carts. It was horses. But it was still, pulling the bones around in carts, raking the bones. So that's catacombing. Cromwell's body was catacombed by the royals. So I present evidence that there is this pleasure, this hidden pleasure in catacombing, which is hidden under the surface. Hidden underground where others cannot see. And, when the Sphinx pulls and rakes the dead groan and moan. You know, the dead groan and moan when the cat rakes its claws, like when people turn up into court and they're raking the fines in. When the workers moan and groan and all the labour they're putting into work, when the Tories are raking all the profits in. So, you know, there's quite a few things that I've covered in this. I am big on this discus theory, and the thing that it was, you know, a major part of the Roman games, the discus, you know, and the word to discuss. But if you've got those symbols of power, you know, the sun and the moon, and if they had these highly polished things that they used to communicate backwards and forwards with them, then don't you think that, you know, oh, the Druids, you know, if it was the Druids, like, for example, or it could be, you know, ancient, you know, Egyptian, anyone, right? If they did have these giant discs to communicate over long distances and to help do, you know, these measurements and triangulations, but, you know, we're saying probably not for that, because it was before you know, that was Stone Age, you know, so not later. Not, you know, that was way before they had the talks, you know. But if there was at least some sort of communication power or some sort of academic network which symbolised some sort of power of communication between, you know, Celts, then wouldn't it be quite? The thing is, the Celts had actually wooden shields. They had wooden shields with like a metal part in the middle, I think, or only a part of it was metal. I think the Vikings actually added that on. So like when the sword slid down, it held it in the shield, the knobble part in the middle. Actually, no, there is a big shield in one of the museums. There is a big shield. I was looking at it. Oh no, it's like a square shape though, isn't it? There's one of the there's a really famous shield in one of the museums. I hadn't actually been to the museums to actually look at them, but I wouldn't mind going to see them. And then you never really know with metal whether it's fake or not, because it's not biological material, is it? So, you know, it's hard to know whether or not people have been chucking fakes in. But like, you know, Gunnerstrup Cauldron and things like that. But, you know, we'll go with the legitimate. So this is something, right? If these discs were very, very precious and very expensive and kind of like emphasised and embodied projected power and the communication, then even though they didn't adopt the writing of the Greeks and the Romans, like, you know, writing things down on paper, right? Wouldn't it, for the Romans, wouldn't it be quite a big thing? Wouldn't it be quite a symbolic move or gesture for every man to have the power, each soldier to have this power, you know, of the disc, but instead of having it circular, like a round shape, they made them square. And that is how the only reason the Romans won, and they didn't beat the Germans, did they? The only reason the Germans won is because of the specific design of the metal plate, you know, and the fact that every single Roman soldier had one, because that's how the defence worked, the special protective strategy. Now, that would actually be one of the symbols of their power. And also, you know, who could afford to give every single soldier, you know, one of those, you know, immense heavy shields, you know. So there's some significance in that. The thing with historians and with archaeologists and people who they don't kind of look at it in a kind of like, you know, like you've got Shakespeare writing plays. He's in the realm of kind of like subjective area of inquiry. So now, when we're doing things now, so someone does something, like a pop star does something, and then another pop star does something to respond, right? They do like a song that's like bounced off it or buffed off it, or or if someone does a tune, they kind of copy it or adapt it, or if there's a style of music, like drum and bass, then someone comes out with slightly different, like grunge, like punk, then someone to grunge, like copying basically, or using it for their ideas. This is where we've got the Wicker Man. Like the Wicker Man. They're saying that the Celts put all their enemies in these giant wicker forms of people and then burn them. But I really don't think that they did that all the time. I just think that was to do with the war, the Gallic Wars. The Romans that they were fighting. Where did they get that idea from? I truly believe that, because, of the Odyssey and all the whole Greek classics, like the giant horse that all the soldiers were hidden to Troy and so forth, loads of men inside a wooden horse. I think that, that story would have been well known, probably world famous story, or, well, not,